We have a few things we'll drop in the chat. As usual, we have our Canvas page set up for today with some resources. We also have the slide deck is in there somewhere. And we've got a pretty packed schedule because we have a guest today who's going to give a presentation from LACOE. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome. Our agenda for today's DAAN meeting. I'm going to start off with some accountability updates, and then we have a special presentation from our guest, Dr. Frank Olmos, who's working as with technology services now. He was with our community schools division not too long ago, and he's going to give you an update about the LACOE data visualization project and ask for some feedback moving forward from some folks. I have a few CalPads updates that are relevant to assessment and accountability folks. Then our amazing assessment team is going to give their assessment updates, and then we'll be joined by Marcus Betancourt from ETS, maybe Wendy Missick too, I'm not sure. The team here for DAAN, it's our combined efforts of the Accountability and Data Literacy Unit and the Assessment Unit. I'm Evan Bartelheim. I'm the project director for the Accountability and Data Literacy Unit. My colleague Hillary Weissman is joining us. And from Assessment, we have Stephen Bartlett and Stephanie Fortunato. Also joining is our glorious team for Accountability and Data Literacy, Margarita Sandoval, who you always hear from if you email dan@laco.edu, as well as Jeremy Vinlund, who's our data specialist. Just a reminder of some housekeeping. We're here to give you the latest information about data assessment and accountability, but it's only as current as yesterday. Things are subject to change. We try to be as timely as possible, but it does change. For today's meeting, because we do get a pretty large group, if you could just drop any questions in the chat, we'll do our best to answer them as we go, but we always want to be thorough. So if there's anything that requires significant follow-up or citation of ed code or other resources, we'll usually wait and post it in our follow-up Q&A that we send as part of our regular DAAN digest. So put your questions in the chat as they arise, anything that comes up, because we love to answer those questions. They do provide a great resource later on. We have, as I mentioned, we have resources in our Canvas page. We will update probably throughout the day. There's probably some pieces that will come up in the questions, and so we'll add any additional resources that are relevant to today's conversation. One other update. So May 2023, May 30th is our final DAAN meeting of the year, and we finally have relative clearance. The numbers are low. Ironically, I had just tested positive for COVID myself, so I don't know how low the numbers are. So I'm working from home today. Don't let that dissuade you though, because on May 30th, we're hoping to have our first and last in-person remote meeting for 2023. We hope to do more in the future. So that meeting will be held at our Ed Center West. We also have a virtual meeting. We know that a lot of you can't make it or don't want to make it, don't care to come in and contact with a lot of other people with that face-to-face interaction. I understand completely. So we do have a virtual meeting. We'll probably, rather than try to do a hybrid, which I feel is kind of a big compromise, what we intend to do is just move our DAAN online meeting to that afternoon, and we'll give you updated details then. Breakfast is being provided. We think we may have an interesting guest from the Lexile Quantile. I don't know what they are. The Lexile Quantile people to come give a real interesting and timely information for the release of CASP results. So that might be really helpful for you to hear. And we will provide breakfast. I think I said that. And then just for the future use, because we know the people who really get shortchanged, those of you who don't want to drive from Lancaster or Santa Clarita or anywhere in the north of the county, we are looking for a venue because we would love to do some DAAN in-person meetings out there next year. So if you've got a space and you'd like to host, please let us know. You can message us indirectly or directly on here while we're in the meeting, or we can, if you want to email us later. But we'd love to have some in-person meetings out there next year too. We'll resume in-person meetings to the extent that we can next year, and we will always provide some form of virtual alternative as well, because we know it's helpful information that you all need. So right into the updates. I'm going to give some accountability updates. We had a lot of stuff came out of our state board meeting. There are a couple items that were very focused on during the state board meeting, and we had a RAN meeting last week, so it's kind of overlapping, so I thought I'd share them all. These came from the CDE's Analysis, Measurement, and Accountability Reporting Division, AMARD. So if you hear AMARD, just know that's what that is. It's our accountability folks at the state. So the first thing in the state board report that they reported out on to the board was related to the 2022 dashboard, and in particular, they focused a lot on chronic absenteeism. And I think it was really just to kind of put some context around chronic absenteeism, because of course, chronic absenteeism was across the board 30%. This is the state level was 30%. I think there's a lot of frustration expressed to the state board and to the CDE about the use of the chronic absenteeism indicator this year in such an anomalous year. So they're trying to provide some context, and they talked about what they provided to LEAs, including some background information that was shared during the dashboard summary report that went out in December with the release of the dashboard. They noted that our chronic absenteeism mirrored the national trends, and they talked about some of the guidance that the CDE and the state superintendent have provided, including a webinar that was provided related to addressing chronic absenteeism. One of the more helpful things that they shared, I think, or more interesting things that they shared, because I think it's easy to just assume that all the data regarding chronic absenteeism was COVID related, but they actually brought up some data quest reporting that is broken down a little bit further, absence by reason. And I think it's worth a look. So if you get into data quest, you dig down in absence by reason, one of the more compelling things is the numbers align for absences, unexcused absences, and excused absences, and then further breakdown by independent study. They're very consistent with actually pre-pandemic. So I think it would be wise, if you're looking at your data, and of course we know that chronic absenteeism continues to be a problem, if you're doing some diving in around that data, to look at some of these other reports that are available, to make that the initial jumping off point when you start doing a root cause analysis, and not just to dismiss the COVID or dismiss the entire year to COVID. And that was kind of what they want to do for the board. I definitely feel that they were feeling a lot of pushback. They also then, of course, part of that pushback comes from the fact that so many schools were identified this year for ATSI in particular. So they shared out about the identification of schools for CSI and ATSI, and I just included our LA County data here, which largely mirrors what the state's numbers look like. So, you know, there's a huge spike in the number of schools identified for ATSI this year. Not inconsistent, and I think they just wanted to make sure that that it wasn't unique to any one county. It was statewide. You had about a 64% identification of schools for ATSI. Just a note though, because I know a lot of folks are grappling with what does this mean for Williams, because we have new legislation or recent legislation that uses CSI and ATSI as a criteria for being placed on the Williams list. Important to note that currently CSESA, which is the county superintendent's organization, is working with the CDE to try to find some options rather than identifying every CSI, ATSI school as being subject to Williams reporting. They have some options that they're working now that would significantly limit the number of schools that would be on the Williams list. Because this was in Ed Code, it would require legislative action, so we won't get approval until the May revise, but it's looking pretty good that not every ATSI school is going to need to be audited for Williams this year. More details to come on that. And as a side note, we did, and I see some of my colleagues from the State and Federal Programs Unit who are joining today. We joined with the State and Federal Programs team, and we did a presentation we called the ins and outs of CSI and ATSI. I cannot recommend it enough. We've got the recording linked here as well as the resources in Canvas. It's as thorough a job as you could hope for. There is another CDE's putting on an ATSI webinar tomorrow, March 30th, and I will add the link to the agenda later. But we really dove into everything from the criteria for identification to the planning requirements, whether you use the SIPSA or the LCAP, what's in a comprehensive needs assessment, what are resource inequities, evidence-based interventions. the LEA responsibilities for CSI and ATSI, the documentation you would need for federal program monitoring, and then what it takes to exit CSI and ATSI. So all these things are posted on this Canvas page with the link. And if you are one of the LEAs that has schools, or if you're a charter school identified for CSI or ATSI, you'll have, I think, pretty much all your questions answered here. Then they went into reporting out. This is again AMARD reporting out to the state board on the accountability work plan. And I'm just going to go kind of piecemeal through this. First thing they talked about was the English learner progress indicator. And this will be kind of the big shift because we haven't ever actually reported out on the full LP. So what they need to do is get in and evaluate the change levels and the cut scores for the LP. They will do this. They actually didn't change the status levels this year because they're, in comparison to 2019, there were not a lot of changes related to the distribution of LEAs across the LP. They also need to then reestablish the 5x5 color grid. So what will status and change look like? This will all be considered as we move closer to the 2023 release. So we'll have a color for the first time, if all things go well, for the LP, and we can see that what 3 years worth of data looks like. And then they're going to be incorporating the performance of the students who take the alt LPAC within the LP as well for the first time. There is a lot of conversation. There's a lot of public feedback related to the LP from public advocates and other groups. And the big push is that there haven't been enough LEAs identified as in the very low category on either the 2019 or the 2022 dashboard. And they feel it doesn't significant, the cut scores are too lenient. So that's part of what will be reinvestigated. Important to note that the way that they determine the cut scores is not through some fixed amount, but rather they look at the distribution of LEAs across the status. And that's how it's kind of determined. And that's the way all the indicators are determined. They don't just set a criterion reference norm, like this is what we're going to cut it at, and everybody's got to meet this level or not. And in addressing the pushback from some of these groups, the AMARD unit noted that if they were to change the LP, it would be the only indicator that wasn't based on kind of a distribution of LEAs. And to some extent, a lot of what they're talking about, because charter schools are thrown in there, it gets kind of missed, actually, that a lot of charter schools may have landed in the very low, but only districts seem to be seen, because their only districts have been identified for differentiated assistance so far. But there is actually, if you consider charters in the mix, there is an equal distribution, and that's how there are a lot of LEAs in the very low category, but it's all up for consideration. If you want to hear more about it, I included the link here for the state board meeting that jumps in right at that point. Additionally, there's in the accountability work plan is the proposed revisions to the graduation rate indicator. This is in response to the U.S. Department of Ed rejection of the DAAS waiver. And what they're looking at is a multiple extended year adjusted cohort graduation rate that will give credit to schools where students receive a regular high school diploma in 6 or more years. So this would be nothing but upside for LEAs, just to make that clear. They're looking for hopefully ways that we can increase the graduation rate that would also capitalize on the way DOS schools operate. And we know they have a very challenging group of students who frequently show up in significant credit deficiency. So they're going to be studying what kind of models there are. And there are some states that are out there that have a 7-year graduation rate already. So we have some models to look at. So that's up next. Then they also will be bringing back and analyzing a couple more components for the college and career indicator. These include internships, student-led enterprise, simulated work-based learning, and the ASVAB for consideration. And actually, this is in the work-based learning component that we submit in CalPADS during the end-of-year submission. And they just haven't really looked deeply into the data yet. They're trying to actually validate that these are real and useful measures, and also to kind of identify what would be used for prepared or approaching prepared. So there's more to come on these, and then there's a couple more that are in the pipeline, which include the civic engagement and the industry certifications So these are all out there, and I just looked the dashboard technical guide for college and career indicator. It's supposed to be released soon. It hasn't been, but that we bring this to your attention because this will be the year we reinstate the college and career indicator on the 2023 dashboards. This is a big year for capturing everything you can for your graduates. Some additional pieces that are going to be reported on the board or on the dashboard. There is a requirement through statute, not a statue. Sorry about that typo. The least restrictive environment data now has to be reported on the dashboard, and the teacher assignment data under priority 1. We already know the link has been shifted there. There's an ad hoc work group that's considering how they would report that teacher assignment data on the dashboard for local indicator priority 1. Some additional information that's going to be posted up there, the science data. We know that there's a lot of interest in having the science data, the CAS data appear as a indicator, its own academic indicator. It's currently linked, but it would take some additional effort to ultimately get that posted. We have to get approval from the US Department of Ed for that, because they seek on these dashboards a balance of academic indicators and other measures of student performance. So that's not going to go through right away. The student growth model is also going to be considered this year, and that wouldn't be posted until 2024, because you may remember that requires 3 years worth of CASP results, and we've got 1 year and we're heading to the second year. So we need a third year before they could generate the growth model again. But these are all parts of what they'll be discussing throughout the year. And by the way, this work plan meeting is an annual event. So every March they report out to the board on what they'll be working on, but it's really important stuff for us to be aware of because it's on the horizon. Finally, there's some discussion, the data quality work plan. They reported this year a number of LEAs who reported that they had not been able to certify their data, or that the data that appeared on the dashboard was inconsistent with what their own data said. And so what they'll be looking at is the alignment for schools and LEAs that failed to certify data, and then subsequently report to the CD that the data is incorrect. And they're going to review the current participation rate penalty for the LPAC as well, to make it more consistent with what we use for ELA and math, rather than what they use now, which is if you don't meet the participation rate, the automatic assignment of a low status. So they're looking to do something equivalent to the lowest obtainable scale score.
Hey, Evan,
yes.
It's Jeremy. There's a few questions there. I don't know if you want to answer them on the chat room.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to hold off on those. We'll wait till we get to the question and answer section. Thanks, Jeremy.
Okay.
Just reporting on the communication work plan. Also, as you know, a lot of the communication plan that came out this year was related to these great toolkit that they provided. They're going to be doing updates to any of the existing flyers. If you have any feedback for them, what you could use for your audience, for your educational partners, they would be happy to hear from you, or feed it to us and we'll feed it to them as well. So anything that may improve your ability to communicate with your educational partners is welcome. And then additional updates to the technical guide, additional web pages and resources with information are all going to be updated. They're also making a grand tour. They're great. And if you saw last week, they were part of the coffee session with ETS, and they gave a breakout of a lot of the stuff you might have heard if you were there, because they want to make sure that folks have an opportunity to talk to them and give their feedback. They're so willing. They actually met one-on-one with me. Actually, I guess it was not quite one-on-one, but one of our districts had a question around the LP, and particularly high school students who were in the lowest criteria. It was a very nuanced question, and they met with us one-on-one, gave us a half hour of their time. So they are very receptive to any questions you might have or any feedback you might have. And this was one additional piece, and I want to first of all emphasize this is not for this year. So any of you who have responsibilities within the LCAP or who are dashboard coordinators, but there was approved an update to the self-reflection tool for school climate. And among the things that you would need to know, especially if you're the person who is responsible for administering the survey, whether it's the Healthy Kids survey or your own survey, or some other version. It's moving now. The requirement would be to move that survey to climate survey conducted on an annual basis. So currently it's only every other year for each grade span that you serve. And then also that the data be disaggregated within the self-reflection tool. And then it's going to add some additional nuances around the and direction around the various components, the narrative components of the self-reflection tool, the things that will be posted on the dashboard, and breaking it up further. It's only a single prompt now, but it'll be 3 prompts moving into the future. But again, important, this does not go into effect until the 2023-24 school year, so there'll be some time to adjust, but you may want to put on your calendar now that if you need to update your frequency of administering your survey. So if you planned on taking a gap next year for 5th grade, let's say, for the Healthy Kids survey, you need to put it back in there moving forward, because you're going to need that. So I have a guest, as I mentioned earlier, Dr. Frank Olmos, who's joining us from Technology Services, and he's going to give us some update on a brand new project that he's working on, that he's leading the charge, the Student Data Visualization Project. Frank, if you just want to direct me to move forward the slides, I'm happy to do so for you. And
okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Dr. Frank Olmos, working for, a project management officer for the Student Data Visualization Project. So very excited to just tell you what it's all about. So next slide, please. So I'm just going to give you an overview. I'm going to also talk about what type of data we're trying to include and the functions. And also I'm going to have a request from all of you to see how you can get involved and how we can get your input and at least your perspectives and how to shape this just to best tailor your needs. So go ahead, next slide, please. So I'm going to tell you about the purpose. I'm going to tell you how this project is aligned with our strategic goals, and also with some ESSER relief funds that we're using as well. Some goals that we have to do that, and the status. Next slide. So the purpose ultimately is to provide a comprehensive, holistic view of the state of education in LA County. Is to really incorporate a wide variety of data. We've been talking about like assessment data, CDE data, absenteeism, academics. But in addition to that, we want to include also like community data. It could be about food insecurity, it could be access to mental health, it could be violent crime, it could be a number of, it could be transportation, it could be a wide variety of data that also has an impact on student outcomes. So we want to integrate all these different types of data, and not in addition to that, make it very, very engaging. Data visualization and using analytic tools, analyze and identify correlations, trends, and patterns. So ultimately give us a comprehensive perspective to it, make all these types of insights and make connections between all these different data. Also, we want to make this very accessible to all stakeholders, and basically to inform strategic decision making, because we want to have like a macro, like forest view angle, so that we can at best allocate resources, and ultimately assist also with mitigating the effects of COVID-19. Next slide, please. So this is aligned with the ESSER objective. So this is purely ESSER funded. So there's a number of goals that we want to achieve, like we want to minimize COVID cases. We want to use region-specific analysis using GIS technologies to help us deploy services and differentiate support and provide differentiated support as well. Identify and analyze school districts with particular needs as well, like or with particular groups like low income, disability, underrepresented groups. Also improve preparedness and response rates for the LEAs and provide them with the resources that they need. Also, we want to use this technology to identify areas where there's, students may not have internet access. So identify regions where ultimately delete the divide, to give them access to internet or give them access to computers or laptops that will give them access to the necessary educational resources that they can at least connect to. And also ultimately too, identify areas where summer learning is necessary. So at least identify that where the most of the learning loss has taken place as a result of the pandemic, and to provide additional support. Next slide. It also has alignment with LACOE strategic plan, and this is just a number of things we want to achieve, up in terms of improve student outcomes, which we will be using various literacy or mathematics assessment tests. We want to improve the collective care and well-being of our students. So we're going to get, data from the California Healthy School Survey as well. And also strengthen our community, also with the community schools effort too. This will help us identify school districts, even school size that can qualify for community school grants, so they can actually, have the additional support that they need. It also helps with our organizational goal of excellence in terms of providing resources and like internet as well for school districts, and also making data accessible. It's really about making having all this data into one portal that it's easy to use, and pretty much from all of the different types of stakeholders, from teachers to school leadership to superintendents to even researchers, university researchers, and the people of the general public can have access to. Next slide. So this is just a rough summary timeline where we are currently. We're meeting with stakeholders and conducting vendor meetings, exploring different ways how to produce this. Ultimately, our goal is to go live toward the end of this year, which is around November, December, once we have done the development. And in the year 2024, it's going to be pretty much a lot of maintenance and support, and any adjustments and revisions of the data visualization portal. Next slide, please. All right, so I'm just going to tell you about the data and the features and functions that we're planning on having. Go ahead, next slide. So as you can see, we're including a wide variety of data: community demographics, digital equity, education, crime, immunizations, food security, air quality, housing, a lot of different variety of data. Ultimately, we want to make the connections. We want to see what are the key factors that are underlying that impact student outcomes, because there's, just going back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's things like, there's students that can only excel if their certain basic needs are met. So we want to make sure that we are meeting and are able to meet those needs and able to provide the support and have coordinated services at the county level, not only within our own organization, but also other organizations like LA County, like Department of Mental Health, and other services and nonprofits that do collectively we can work together using one source to provide the support. Next slide. And also, we want to have enhanced features and functions. Definitely a popular one is exporting and reporting. We want to have all this data very readily, able to export, so you can have it in an Excel file. You can do your own analysis, filters, and we want to have filters, queries of data, ability to compare multiple years as well, having alert notifications, and also have tailored dashboards, and also perform a variety of statistical analysis that you can do. So we want to have a very robust system that you have multi-functions, multiple ways to do the analysis. Next slide. All right, so this is my request. So there is a survey I would like for you to fill out. I'm going to put the link in the chat. Go next slide, please. So basically, this is where I'm calling for your assistance. We want to make sure that this is something that will meet your needs. We want to align it to your needs and how you plan on using on data. So I want you to see if you are available, or you have somebody else, a representative from your district who can help us be part of our focus group. This is the great opportunity to get involved, so to get your input. And so we can make sure we can get engaged, at least to the point that we know how to tailor it, because right now we're in the development phases of this project. We want to craft it and tailor it just to best meet your needs. So please, when you get a chance, fill this out. It'll just take less than a minute. And then we'll put you on the list and we'll coordinate some meetings with you so we can get your input and your involvement. And that's it. And that's my contact information. You could always take a snapshot of that or copy and paste, or take a snapshot. There's a copy, I'm sure, in Canvas, but if you need to reach me, that's how you can reach me. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Olmos. I didn't see any questions roll in, but I'm sure that this audience will. I told Frank, listen, if you want to know who the data people are, you got to come to DAAN, because these are your core people who will be grappling with the data and making use of it. And, you know, many of our districts and charter schools have a pretty robust data system, whatever that may be. It may be attached to their student information system, or they may pay for a third party. This would be something that would be either a good complement, or if you don't have that robust data, this will be a good alternative, or this could be your data source. And we've seen in other counties where we have these very rich systems that, to the extent that they meet all your needs, you don't need that additional data system or data warehouse yourself. And that's, I think, the goal here. And so I really feel like DAAN folks are the folks who will be benefit from this. So I wanted to have Frank come join us, and we provide some information. We live in this data all the time, so we are regularly giving him input, but we really needs to hear from our LEA. So I encourage you to fill out that survey and to email Frank with any questions. Thanks for joining us. All right, some CalPADS updates. Speaking of data, let's just jump right in. And I will say, this is the Assessment and Accountability Edition. If you don't speak CalPADian, no worries. I've got Stephen here to translate for you. Right, Stephen? So just so you know, the CalPADS end of the year dates are forthcoming. They're coming up here shortly. May 8th is the close or the opening of the submission window, excuse me, with that initial certification deadline, which only requires that the LEA approve, not the SELPA approval, coming on July 28th. Then the amendment window ends on August 25th, with the SELPA level approval required for the end of year 3 and 4 certifications. Then important for if you are an accountability person, you need to know this: the 4-year cohort data will be pulled from the ODS, the online data system, on August 25th. So this is the information that's going to inform the dashboard cohort reporting, as well as data quest reporting. It's your A through G rate and all these things. So if you haven't worked with your CalPADS person yet to devise a plan for reviewing that data, going back to what we said earlier about the data discrepancies that CD was reporting on, or the data inconsistencies, this is where you nip it in the bud. Put together your team to review the data to make sure that, at the very least, it looks consistent with what you're seeing in your student information system, what's being reported to the state. Because once it goes in, it's like hermetically sealed. You can't change that data anymore. So you want to make sure it's right, what you certify. And that's kind of what the CD will go back to. You certified this data. And we have at least one LEA that, their high school is still identified for low graduation rate because of 1 year's worth of bad data. And it happened in my last district as well. It happens, but you need to take initiative, because now things are going to get a lot tighter in terms of timelines. Moving forward, this is coming up a change to the dashboard reporting. The release dates for the dashboard, they're moving up. So this year, and this is what the districts want. The Department of Finance has said this is what they hear for alignment with the LCAP process. We need that dashboard earlier in the year. It totally makes sense. Of course, who's on the other end of this is the LEAs reporting, and the poor CalPADS technicians who are, they're leaving at unprecedented rates. I will say this year's been tough for them, but so they need all the support they can get. But yeah, so it's moving up. So by 2026, the dashboard is supposed to be available by October 15th. And moving forward, that'll be the date, October 15th release for the dashboard. They'll be adjusting those CalPADS submission timelines accordingly to make sure that those can be met. But the certification deadlines will not be extended in 23-24 as they have historically. So no deadline changes unless in case of a natural disaster. And then they'll be moving submission deadlines based on policy discussions. Some additional notes that are relevant here. So the parent guardian highest education level, this informs your socioeconomically disadvantaged student group. So beginning next fall, the parent guardian highest education level code will be collected for both parent guardian 1 and parent guardian 2 in the SIMP, the student information file. If both of those fields are populated, there'll be a fatal validation implemented if parent guardian 2 highest level education level code is missing when the parent guardian 2 first name is populated. So if you have a name in there and it doesn't see an education level, it's going to give you a fatal error. There isn't a need to go back and adjust the historical data, but if you change something, if something goes back and changes, you want to make sure that you account for that. By and large, I will say that the education level, most of the socioeconomically disadvantaged qualify based on free and reduced lunch or some other criteria. That there's several criteria that go in there. Homeless, foster youth all go into the SED category. So this is a relatively small amount. So hopefully there's not a mountain made out of a molehill, but it can have an effect. So just make sure you check in with your CalPAD staff to know what's taking place. And as was already the case, anybody who declines the state is not included in SED automatically. Related to LPAC and CAS testing, we're transitioning into our CAS or our assessment team. And Stephen, feel free to jump in on this, but this is just an update from the CalPAD's quarterly meeting last week. So just want to remind everyone that the nightly extraction from the CalPAD's ODS, again, the online data store, takes 48 hours to show up in TOMS. So you got to give ample time for your data to get from CalPADS into TOMS. They're suggesting that the CalPADS coordinators continue the ongoing maintenance of the various files here. Your straight CalPADian there. They want to make sure that all the race, ethnicity, program eligibilities, and ELAS status are up to date for testing. And then they noted that missing or non-matching values are going to prevent student names from showing up on the test list in TOMS. They did give this big caution. So a lot of people like to get ahead of the curve and get their program end dates in before the end of year. So like program 181, 182, which is your free and reduced lunch files. But if you populate those student enrollment exits, it actually will drop them from the student list. So they put out a notice, and I'll reinforce this on Thursday. We have a CalPADS network meeting, but you don't want to exit early. As much as it's good practice to get ahead when you can. In this case, this is one thing you don't want to do as long as the testing window is open. There were some additional questions that came up in a CalPADS Q&A last week related to MIDS, multiple identifiers. And I just wanted to include this link back to a December email that went out to CASP and LPAC coordinators with some specific information around SSID alignment issues, including MIDS, and what to do during testing. There's, the CSIS folks didn't necessarily have a lot of the great answers like Brandy Hodeke usually would, and she wasn't a part of that meeting, but for your information, that this is still the most timely guidance that's there in that December email. This is another important thing. This is actually just popped on my radar. Hopefully you're aware of this. But this is related to students with disabilities, specifically students with disabilities who qualify for the California alternate assessment. They have this new pathway to the high school diploma, and the link for the guidance is down at the bottom. But as soon as this year, any students you may have who are graduating with this new pathway to the high school diploma, these students will be counted as graduates. So historically, these students have gotten a certificate of completion. They're non-graduates in terms of your graduation rate, but students who choose the new pathway to the high school diploma will actually be counted as graduates for federal reporting. So this is an important opportunity, I think. It's not without some conversation, both with your within your LEA and with your parents. But there's guidance here as far as how they could be exited or should be exited with some nuance, because there's a new code. There's not a code in place right now. It'll be offered next year, but if you have students who are continuing education after they graduate, because these students would be entitled to continue until the age of 22, they need to be re-enrolled, and they need to retroactively change their enrollment status with the new code. So this is all good stuff. Again, an upside for districts and charter schools to get a bump on their graduation rate. Additionally, this law SB 532, this is an extension of 167, and which was originally passed, I think, in 2009 to serve foster youth who were allowed then to graduate with the state minimum requirements for graduation. There have been a number of adjustments and adaptations and additional student groups added to that. And this is actually going to codify some aspects of this, and does require LEAs to actually meet and consult with students who in their senior year, if they fit one of the criteria, and I don't have them all memorized, but they're in the link down below. I highly recommend looking at this link. But to consult with students and offer them a fifth year, it's mandatory, and a fifth year if they don't have the necessary graduation, the credits to graduate, to offer them the state minimum requirements. So this is kind of codifying this process, but it does put more on the LEAs to make sure that these meetings happen, because it would be subject to a UPC. But this is, again, another upside, because, and I saw the question about AB 104 earlier, there hasn't been additional conversation about extending AB 104, which, as you may remember, extended the state minimum graduation requirements to students who are in 11th or 12th grade in 2021. But this could be another opportunity to bolster graduation rates based on what's the right thing to do. But you need to make sure you're working with that, and there's some guidance for CalPADS with regards to how that's recorded. And then these are just a few last slides. Didn't quite know where to put these things. So, but it is related. So the CHESP, right? So the CHESP has some upcoming summer testing windows that are reflected here. So if your LEA administers the CHESP, we'll get locations for the CHESP out to you as soon as those are released as well. We did it at LACOE last year, I believe, or at least we did a training for the CHESP coordinators. Then they have some additional changes for the future of the CHESP. So currently enrolled in second semester, sophomore year, students may choose to take that exam to measure their proficiency in English language arts and math at the college and career readiness standards. And then students who pass proficiency exam and exit high school may, regardless of their age, take the remaining equivalency subtests to obtain a high school equivalency certificate. Marguerite, I see your question about the GE that may have passed the GED. We'll answer that in our follow-up questions. Finally, PFT updates. This was just shared with us at RAN. Just the administration this year will be the same as it was in 2021-22. They haven't formalized the final, the replacement test, but the permanent regulations have been improved moving forward. So those are, and body composition has been, again, removed from that annual assessment. And LEAs will need only report student participation in the school accountability report card, and it's reported school-wide and for all 5 of the remaining subtests. I will note that the schools are not disallowed from using the healthy fitness zones if they're not provided any support from the CDE anymore, but for the opportunity to extend the 2-year waiver on PE that high schools depend on. They're still saying if you wanted to administer, but kind of do so at your own risk. But that is a possibility. If you have questions about that, shoot me an email and I'll give you the latest details on that. And that's it. I'm handing it over to my amazing team. Sorry, I feel like I've been talking for a long time here.
Thanks, Evan. Good morning, everyone. My name is Stephanie Fortunato. My colleague here, Stephen Bartlett from the assessment unit. So we're going to go ahead and give you some updates this morning as it relates to all things assessment. On the next slide, you'll find here our contact information. So if at any point you need to reach out to us, please do so. We're happy to be able to hop on a call or a Zoom or email or whatever works best to be able to answer all of your pertinent questions, especially as we know assessment season is really upon us. We know we've been in the midst of LPAC already, but we know that for a lot of you, especially with these spring breaks, typically you're starting right after you're coming back. So we know that in the heat of things, sometimes there's questions that tend to come up. So we're happy to work with you on that. So we're going to go ahead and provide some updates related to both CASP and LPAC. You'll see on the next slide, we'll also kind of share with you some professional learning opportunities that are coming up as well. So we'll go ahead and we'll start with some CASP updates. As we just mentioned, we know that testing season is upon us. And so now more than ever is a great opportunity if you haven't already. On the next slide, you'll see, now's a great time if you haven't been utilizing those interim assessments. We really, really do recommend that you have students practice going through an IAB. It's so good to be able to get students, especially your third grade students who haven't, taken a summative assessment yet, to be able to log into the system and, see how to sort of, utilize the testing interface. It's great for your test administrators to be able to log in, see what it's like to set up a session. We can't emphasize enough the importance of really getting everyone to log in before they're actually sitting down and taking a summative assessment. So utilizing the interim assessments, utilizing those practice and training tests, just really tremendous opportunities for everyone to be comfortable and familiar with the platform, looking at the types of questions that are there. And so there's some quick links there that'll take you directly to, how to set up those test sessions, and then a quick video there on utilizing those practice and training tests. On the next slide, also, it's always nice, they produce, CDE produces the coordinator checklists early on in the year. And sometimes you'll take a look at it and then sort of put it aside. Well, make sure you are getting out those checklists now, as the site coordinator, sharing those with all of those, staff members, even for the test administrators, having them look at the checklists. It does such a nice job of, just kind of preparing, what do I need to do before the assessment, during, and after. And so one of those things we can't emphasize enough is also making sure everybody who has needed to sign, the forms, that they are doing so well in advance. There's nothing worse than, you're ready to go ahead and test students and they're not able to. And so there is about a 30 to 60 minute time period where they would, need to, have access. So once they're completing the form, 30 to 60 minutes before they would actually be able to then log into the site. So please do make sure that your test administrators, your test examiners, even your site coordinators, everyone has signed those forms, even those non-security, non-TOMS user security affidavits, make sure those have been signed as well, well in advance. There are some reports that you can run in TOMS to actually determine who has signed it and who hasn't signed it. So you'll see right there, it's called the security forms and remote administration status report. That'll be able to help you in, figuring out who has and who hasn't signed everything. And yes, it undoubtedly, I see what you're writing there, Chris. Waiting to the day of, it just is already so much like anxiety and stress inducing. Why add to it? So just make sure you're getting that done well in advance. And continuing to, on the next slide, part of the checklist as well is checking and verifying that all students have their test settings that are input there. So that's, all of those accessibility supports. So your accommodations and designated supports, they're in there. They're in TOMS. They're already assigned to the students. It does take 24 to 48 hours. Once they're in there. So it's just, good practice to make sure that those are all done, that you're running the report and checking to see, which supports have been assigned to which students. You'll see there also for remote administration, if you are using that. Yes.
Oh, can I interrupt really quickly?
Sure.
So on those updates, I want to mention that one of our network members, of course, mentioned an issue with adding bulk accommodations and designated supports for a tool, using a tool like the ISAP tool for those bulk uploads, and that uploading a second ISAP tool for an individual student SSID would overwrite the accommodations that have been uploaded from an output from, for example, SACE reports, LPAC report, or the Welligent Section K report used in a direct batch upload template. But we ran this issue by CDE at RAN this month, and CDE indicated they're aware of the issue and they are building out new test settings in the application program so that there will be 3 options overriding existing test settings only updating test settings that have changed and resetting and erasing all test settings. So that I wanted to mention as an update from CDE just recently.
Yeah, I'm so glad that they're doing that too, because there's nothing worse than you input everything and then you're uploading a new document and then it overrides everything and you're going, wait a second, I didn't want all of that other information to erase.
Absolutely.
So that's a great system improvement. So I'm happy. Thanks for sharing that too, Stephen, jumping in there. Okay, yeah, so also for remote administration, if you are doing any kind of remote testing, making sure that your test examiner is going to be administering remotely, that the students have their video permissions set to Y or yes in TOMS. And so just making sure that that is completed well in advance as well. So same thing, you just want to be able to have as smooth of an administration as possible. All right, so once you are there and you are administering, again, we can't emphasize enough what the practice is going to look like at the district level, what it's going to look like at your school site for monitoring those completion reports. And so, making sure, which of your students have started the assessments, have completed them, are in the midst of completing them. So you have a couple of different options. You'll see that this screenshot here is from TOMS, where you're actually using the links tab at the top. And you can use the completion status tab right there. The other option as well is to be able to use the Cambium system. So you'll see on the next slide. I love this one because you're able to then use the plan and manage feature and determine the exact status of students as well. Again, those who have started, those who have not started, those who have completed, specifically, maybe you might have students who have paused an assessment. This is also where you're going to find out if your students perhaps have a test that's expired as well. So this system is, just making it part of like your daily practice, making sure your test administrators have it as part of their daily practice, that they're running these reports on an ongoing basis throughout your testing window. So those are some of those CASP updates. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Stephen to provide some updates as it relates to LPAC.
Awesome, Stephanie. Thank you. Yeah, on the completion reports from the LPAC side, many of you noted a difference between what TOMS says is a completed number of LPAC tests and what the TIDE system shows. Of course, TOMS completion reports are updated nightly. They include both students currently enrolled, active within the LEA, and those who have been exited but not enrolled at another LEA or might be inactive in CalPads. The TIDE completion report is updated multiple times per day and only contains students who are actively enrolled with the LEA and CalPAD. So two differences in those different sources of completion resorts. And a few notes before we look through LPAC updates. As you begin CASP testing season, you may have noticed that most of the parent notifications templates letters are dated in 2021, 2022. Updates to these template letters are not pending. CDE's indicated that parent notification letters are on a 2-year review cycle, and we advise, of course, that prior templates modified as appropriate would be used, not waiting. Also, Evan mentioned the CalPADS quarterly updates meeting for March 2023. And in a non-CalPADian, what I believe the important piece of that slide that Evan showed is that clean CalPADS enrollment is essential to assessment. If the student isn't in CalPADS with an unambiguous enrollment, they won't be available to test in with a CASP. And so no overlapping enrollments. They have to have an end date that is not closing out their enrollment, and an active enrollment in CalPADS. There are two things that will affect LPAC, especially LPAC initial LPAC going forward, that were also mentioned at that March 2023 series of meetings. They had a slide on a new language code set. So that would be up the codes that that signify language in the ELAS file, or the English language acquisition status file. That's the file that drives whether or not you can test a student with the initial LPAC and the TBD. Once that TBD turns into an LPAC initial assessment, that that language becomes the primary language for the L status or the IFEP status. So that new language code set will probably be seamless for most of you if it's been implemented in your SIS, but good to check, good to make sure it's happening or happened already with your particular SIS, and that's ready to go. It should be a more or less a behind the scenes thing rather than something that really affects your face of LPAC and face of your SIS, but good to check on that. Also, the new TK grade level, I believe Brandy indicated a bunch of some ambiguity on whether or not that grade level would be tested with initial LPAC. Of course, stay tuned on that, but I don't believe there is a lot of questions on that from the other end of the spectrum. I believe the assessment was calibrated down to 3-year-old, so a new TK grade level that includes 4-year-olds would be included in the design of the assessment, and it's anticipated that guidance will include TK as a testing grade level for initial LPAC. So those things are good to keep on your radar, that language code set and the TK grade level, and that the implication for summer in initial LPAC testing, those things coming out of CalPADS as well. All right, so I wanted to mention that CD's Tracy Albee provided a list at RAN of LPACs by LEA by RAN region, highlighting the number of students that still need to be assessed. There could be a few new enrollees on your list, but based on what they've seen, the majority are over 30 days and overdue. So we've posted a list where you can look up your own LEA on the Canvas page. And of course, these reports are available to you in TOMS. Look out and make sure that you are not beyond that 30 days overdue for those 1,000 students. Those 1,000 students are within your LEAs here in LA County. Of course, others across the state of California, but they're notifying us because it's an issue that needs to be addressed. And so we are passing that along to you. There was a note also, with regard to initial assessment on interim assessments in the context of the interim LPAC. We asked on behalf of one of our districts, interim LPAC, whether it would be able to be used for determining whether an EO can be assigned to take the initial LPAC as part of a correction of classification process, how that might work when that is rolled out in the future. CD had a note on that and indicated that LPAC interims will be rolled out next year for improving teaching and learning. Correction of classification, of course, should be based on an EO student's performance within the classroom compared to all other students. And if there's a primary language present that may not have previously identified, and if the student's not performing on par with their fellow EO students, purpose of interim assessments, although they could be one source of evidence, should not be the sole source of evidence for use in a correction or classification process. So a little bit of clarification on the use of that assessment. As we move on to the next slide, that was a lot of words that I used for that slide. LEA staff who have not completed LEA certification courses for the summative LPAC and summative alternate LPAC yet should access and complete these courses in Moodle. It's critical LEA staff complete these courses so they're prepared to train their test examiners, as the test administration window opened on February 1st, 2023. Training is required annually and must be completed by all ELEAs for the summative LPAC and by all LEAs with eligible students for the summative alternate LPAC. You can direct any questions about training at Moodle support. Also, just a great training. That certification training has a great overview for you. I recommend going in and doing it, even if it's already been done for your district or your LEA. It's a great overview of the whole process for someone with an administrative role, especially. There is another note on summative LPAC and some of alternate LPAC, it's not mentioned in another slide because it was released on Friday. Reclassification guidance was updated slightly in the LPAC information guide on Friday, as announced in the Assessment Spotlight, issue 225. The LPAC information guide as downloaded should have the note updated in March 2023 in the footer and be named LPAC Info Guide 23.docx. If you're getting the LPAC Info Guide 22.docx when you're attempting to download, I'd use the incognito mode or clear cache. That's something that happened to me. The guidance has changed slightly with some clarifying language regarding reclassification and regarding students with IEPs. Moving on to the next slide, summative LPAC, summative alternate LPAC test administration window started, of course, February 1st, goes through May 31st. And there's notes from ETS indicating that summative LPAC speaking calibration needs to be completed in Moodle for grade levels or grade spans that are being administered. Summative alternate LPAC test examiners should complete the alternate LPAC test examiner certification course in Moodle prior to testing students. And then, of course, score should be entered in the data entry interface during or immediately after administration of the speaking domain. Moving to the next slide, every year, a subset of schools is required to participate in second scoring for the summative alternate LPAC. LEAs can use the lookup tool on the second scoring webpage on the LPAC website to search the school by name or by CDS code to check if the school is selected for second scoring. If your school shows up on the lookup tool, your school has been selected for second scoring. If you have any questions, you can reach out to Marcus, who we'll may see later, or the LEA Success Agent for Region 11, I believe is a team as well. Most LEAs have the same setting, second scoring setting for the entire LEA. Some of our larger LEAs in the region, LAUSD, for example, might have different settings for different schools. There's a reminder that a list of all pickup dates is available in the list of key dates in the online test administration manual. The sooner LEAs return K2 writing answer books, the sooner ETS can complete the quality control process and release student score reports. So I know a lot of concern about when score reports become available. One of the ways to increase the or reduce the date of return of those SSRs would be to turn in writing the answer book sooner. Another reminder on summative LPAC test materials. If you need to order your primary test materials order and miss that on December 19th, the deadline, you can do a supplemental test material orders for your entire order, or you can make those supplemental test material orders if you had an unanticipated increase in the number of students who will be tested with the summative LPAC. Another reminder on the next slide on LPAC coordinator designation. The superintendent designation process for 23-24. LPAC administration must be completed as soon as possible. April 1st, which is this Saturday, is the deadline for LEA LPAC coordinator designation. Your superintendent may have 95,000 emails, and so you're going to want to have a word, maybe in person or over the phone, and remind them of this process. Initial LPAC administration and scoring training is going to be available in Moodle training site beginning on April 25th, so next month. Experienced LEA coordinators do not need to repeat the LEA certification course for 23-24, but only to verify LEA certification. The 23-24 initial alternate LPAC AST opens May 10th. There's a single alternate LPAC AST certification course that covers both the initial alternate LPAC and summative alternate LPAC. The alternate LPAC test examiner certification course allows test examiners to administer both assessments until the new certification course's annual launch in early November 2023. A few more notes before we move on to some professional learning opportunities. CDEs noted that a recommendation is going to the SBA for approval in May 2023. So for the alternate LPAC reclassification criteria, so this would be an anticipated SBA board date when CDE will take to board the recommendation that alternate LPAC level 3 be used for reclassification criteria 1 for students taking alternates. Interim guidance released in the 2022-23 LPAC information guide indicates that prior to that SBA approval, use of the level 3 alternate LPAC for criteria 1, of course, is acceptable. And those updates to the 2022-23 LPAC information guide that we mentioned previously includes IEP team clarification, but do not adjust that prior guidance on reclassification criteria 1. On interim LPAC assessments, a few notes before we move on. The CDs indicated that they'll be providing training on implementing the interim assessments, so look out for those trainings in the future. Using the teacher hand scoring system to score constructed response questions, finding data in SIRS beginning, and you might find data in SIRS for those interims beginning in fall 23. Also, some notes, all interims will be available to test examiners in LPAC or CASP test administrator roles. So LPAC interims are anticipated to be available both on the CASP side, and the CASP interims would be available on the LPAC side. And of course, that test operations management system role just for interim assessments would have access to both sides, the LPAC and CASP interim assessments. CD doesn't plan to split roles for initial and summative LPAC test examiners. CDE also mentioned that they're in collaboration with SCOE for developing resources for tools for teachers for LPAC and ELD standards starting in 23-24, and they'll release information in the future on that. That's all I've got for LPAC, and I believe we're going to talk about a few professional learning opportunities.
All right, sure. So we'll just go ahead and finish off. If you didn't have a chance to view the email with some information about the new asynchronous training modules for hand scoring those interim assessments, it's a really nice addition for training educators on using those interim assessments that do require hand scoring, but how to actually go about completing those hand scoring components. So check out these asynchronous training modules that they have available. Also upcoming is few modules here you'll find on the next slide on accessing summative assessment results in SIRS, the California Educator Reporting System. You'll see module 1 will be on May 4th, module 2, May 11th, module 3 on May 18th. You'll find a link here at the bottom of the slide for you to be able to to register for those upcoming training modules. And also, if you're not already a part of our Wednesdays at 1 group, we started in February. We're going to be continuing through the end of May. You'll find on the next slide a link for you to be able to register to join us. It's very, informal. Every Wednesday from 1 to 2, just to kind of really talk about, with LEA coordinators, how are things going during testing, some challenges, what's working well, and really the ability to be able to share an abundance of resources with one another. So we always look forward to each Wednesday, and certainly, some you might be able to make, some you might not, but feel free to join us when you can. So that link is there. And then also finally, we have a professional learning opportunity for administrators coming up at the end of May, May 31st. There is no cost to attend. Please do share, especially with, additional district leaders and also your school site leaders as well. We'd love to be able to have them join us. and already start their thinking on using interim assessments for the upcoming school year. So if you haven't made use of them as of yet, but you're thinking this next year is the time when you want to get started on them, please do join us on May 31st for about 90 minutes. We'll kind of talk you through, just some considerations for how you can work those into your upcoming school year. There is some contact information also for LEA, CASP, and LPAC coordinators. We're just sharing this information. You probably have access to this information or utilize it on a regular basis, but you'll see on the next slide, just an easy reference if you need to reach out at any time, the phone numbers to call and who to contact and things like that. And so with that, we know that there are some questions that have been in the chat. We're answering. And I think at this point, though, we're going to go ahead and turn it over to, I believe Marcus is here joining us. And he will go ahead and share some pieces with you next. Marcus, are you here?
Yes, hello everybody.
Hey, Marcus.
Hi, how's everybody doing this morning? Hope you guys are staying dry down there. It's pretty wild across the state.
We're good today. Thank you.
Good, excellent. So I'm
Hey,
going to
Marcus,
jump right.
sorry, Marcus, will you be able to join us in person on our May meeting? I don't know if you heard that we're doing.
Yeah, I did hear that. I can definitely check with our team members here. I'm not sure what that would be like as far as like flying down there, driving down there or whatnot. But I will definitely ask about that. So I'd like to meet all you guys in person, definitely.
I think you'd be a highlight. People would love to meet you in person.
Oh, thank you. It's very nice of you to say. Thank you very much. So I'm going to jump right into things here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So there are a couple of pre-administration reminders I'd like to go over with everybody. And again, Evan, Stephanie, and Stephen, you guys cover it and use our information very well. So again, kudos to you. You guys have a great team, and definitely all the LAs under LACOE are lucky and very fortunate to have you guys to be able to compile that information so well put together as well. So just wanted to give you hats off to you. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. Again, I do apologize if at any point I either cut out. The weather where I'm at currently is somewhat turbulent and severe. So lights at home already flickered a couple times. So I apologize if I cut out at any point. Go ahead and share the screen. So we'll just jump right into it here. So a couple things, as Stephanie, Evan, and Stephen had mentioned. So this is just some pre-administration reminders. I updated some of the information that was on the presentation prior. So there's a couple things, just making sure that all of the users that are being added, that they are completing and signing and submitting those security forms. At least we at least want to say at least 30 to 60 minutes prior before login. I've worked with LEAs where they'll have users sign in the day of testing. So if they can do that maybe a couple days in advance, that'll help cure some headaches going on as far as the administration. So one thing I do want to make a point of is making sure that, so that if a TA signs in and they haven't completed that form, not only will the test not appear for the roles they've been added with, but most likely a good indicator of that, only the interim assessments will appear. So if they ever access the TA interface and it's only interim assessments, it's pretty likely they haven't signed the forms or they just recently signed it and didn't wait for the 30 to 60 minutes to elapse. Another thing is with these forms, I get calls a lot from the test administrators, and I ask them about these forms and they say, oh, well, we already signed those forms in Moodle. So Moodle security forms are a complete different set from the ones we have within TOMS for our role. So just please be aware of that when you're going through that. The Moodle security forms will not grant access to the test administrator interface because they're two different forms. And again, LEA level coordinators and site coordinators can always access those security forms. Specifically, the report is the security forms and remote administration report. It's actually going to show all of the users who have signed the test. And it'll actually show, if you scroll on the spreadsheet, it'll show the exact timestamp, date, and with the forms that were signed. So you can always verify with the user if they just completed those or if they haven't completed those, it'll actually show the timestamp for you as well. So just some more pre-administration reminders. Prior to opening a test assessment for a student and launching assessment, just make sure that all their accommodations and their accessibilities, including accommodations and designated supports, have been uploaded via TOMS. So we just want to make sure that that's done at least a minimum of 24 to 48 hours prior, because we need to allow the test delivery system to actually integrate all of those settings. For remote administration, this is another good point as well. This can be done either in the student's profile or in the test assignments upload. So there should be a section in there where you can actually select Y or N for yes or no for remote video permission. So that's going to allow a student to be administered to remotely. If they don't have Y, they can only take an in-person assessment. They will not have access to remote administration until it is indicated as Y. Just a couple of initial and summative LPAC reminders, as the initial is an ongoing yearly assessment. So if any students for the initial or summative LPAC are unable to be tested for illnesses, chronic absenteeism, anything like that, just make sure that you're documenting every attempt made to test those students and filing that in the student's cumulative file. With the LPAC being a federally mandated test, unfortunately, we can't have any condition codes applied like they are on the CASP side. So it can't be opted out of anything like that. And then specifically for the initial LPAC, just remember that grades 3 through 12 require the responses to be, for the written domain, they need to be hand scored and marked as complete in order for their results to appear in TOMS, specifically their student score reports as well. One moment here, sorry about that. So when it comes to the completion status report, so Stephanie did a great job of showing the completion status when it comes to using the search filters. So I want to show a different side of the completion reports. As Stephen had mentioned before, the reports in TOMS themselves, as far as the completion reports, they take about a 24-hour period or a nightly period to update. So they're not going to be as quick as the actual Cambium system that Stephanie had mentioned. So this is the one Stephanie had mentioned regarding the plan and manage testing. This is still a really useful tool to use with the search filters, specifically if you're looking to get specific on students completed or not completed or being in an expired state. But there is another section that you can also use. It's the search by SSID feature. So if you go under completion status reports and click on the drop down there, you can actually select search by SSID. Now, this is a little bit different. It's going to allow you to view students that have outstanding tests. Unlike the filters that you have under the plan and manage section, it's not going to show students who haven't started a test. But say, for example, you have a student that has started 2 of the 4 domains in a summative assessment, and you want to see, well, did these students actually complete or they paused at the time? When you enter an SSID, I believe that field allows you to enter up to 20 as long as they're separated by commas. It's actually going to display, when you click on the generate report section under that, it's going to display all the outstanding tests that a student actually has completed, or if they're in a pause state, if they're started, and also if they're expired. So you can definitely use that to see, if a test examiner says, well, I've completed this assessment, you can actually search by the SSID and it'll show who actually opened the administration. I believe the table is going to show the start date, the date of last activity, and then the end date. So that's going to give you a clear indication on the status of that student. It'll either show as started, and it'll actually show the test question they're on. For example, if they're like on 8 of 10 questions, it'll show 8/10, indicating that they haven't completed the test, but they're on 8 of 10. So I find it a really useful feature to use just to see if any tests are outstanding for a student. Any questions so far? I'm looking at the chat right now as well, just to see if there's anything popping up. See a couple here. Okay, I will continue on then. So these are a lot of in-person testing issues and troubleshooting I'm seeing in the field currently as right now. So I just wanted to update you all on that. So one of the big ones I'm seeing a lot from LEAs that are reporting are no tests available at this time. This typically has to do with demographic information making its way from TOMS to the actual test delivery system. So a lot of the time an LEA will update in CalPads, and then when they're showing in TOMS, one indication that they go off of a lot is if it shows as assigned, they are under the understanding that if it's assigned in TOMS, then the test delivery system should show the student being available. But technically, it takes usually about a minimum of 24 hours and up to 48 for that newly established demographic information in TOMS to be displaying in the test delivery system. And I'll show you a little bit later on a slide that there's a feature, there's a student lookup feature that you can use, that TAs can use in the TA interface that can help kind of indicate whether or not the student's information has made it to the test delivery system. So this is another common one that I'm coming across a lot in the field. Please check if that your information is entered correctly. If you need help, ask your TA. Some of you LEAs may have come across this when testing. So basically, it's just another verification of making sure the student has entered their SSID correctly. A lot of the time, what happens is sometimes there will be either, even if there's a space before or after entering that in the student TA interface, that will throw up that specific error because it's reading that space as well. So just make sure there's no spaces before the SSID or after the SSID as well, and when you input the name. And I'll show up the lookup tool as well. Should be in one of these next slides. Another one is the session is not available for testing. So just again, making sure that the student is entering their SSID correctly and ensuring there are no spaces before or after. I come across that a lot. Usually when an LEA reports us to this, we'll launch our own test session and ask for their permission to log in as a student, just so if we can recreate that specific message they're saying. And a lot of the time it's because there's even a space before or after that. So just make sure that no spaces before or after SSID or the name. No match. So the student information wasn't entered correctly. This is a one that I've come across numerous times. So again, making sure that the student's name is correct as well. A lot of the time I come across this with students who have specific characters in their name, or if they have an accent. So that no match occurs a lot of the time with students with accents in their name. So this is the student lookup feature that I was referring to. So no match for student ID. Again, a lot of these errors generate because of either the demographic information not updating, or a lot of the time a space and or character that a student has what is in TOMS in their profile is not being included. So that happens a lot. Now this one's a little bit different. So a lot of the time when a student actually goes into the student interface, they need to make sure that they're selecting the CA prefix. If they select any other prefix, because there's a lot of states that use this similar interface. So if they select like Ohio or Florida, FL, anything like that, and they try to move forward, it'll show this no match for student ID because they have to make sure that the CA prefix is there prior. So if it remains that the CA prefix is not there, there should be an icon, like a little box icon in the lower left-hand corner of the student's device. And they'll actually see a little box. They can click on that box. That will bring them back to the page that allows them to select the dropdown for the state. And then just going back to where it says that student lookup, that can be used anytime. And I've taken a screenshot of just a mock session that I have generated. That student lookup at any point, the TA can type in the SSID, which I believe I've included on the next, oh no, sorry. So it'll actually show, once you click on that student lookup, you'll actually be able to see the student, type in their SSID, and then you're gonna be able to see all the information. One thing I've come across is if they haven't updated or recently updated from CalPads to TOMS, their demographic information with the newly enrolled LEA hasn't reached the test delivery system. If at any point the TA looks up the student and they show the old information for a student and it not being the correct LEA, it's a pretty good indicator that the information is still trying to update from TOMS to the actual test delivery system. So just be aware of that as well. So these are some of the remote testing issues that I've come across. I've included this on the last couple presentations, but I always like to revisit it. So this particular error message, the inactive test, the reason this appears is because the student is not using the secure browser when launching. They're trying to access the student interface just using a typical browser, Google Chrome, Safari. I'm not even sure if Safari is even being used anymore. I think it's Edge now. Anytime they're using just a general browser, this usually appears because they have to use that secure browser to test with. This one is specific to students that do not have that Y indicated I had mentioned earlier for their remote test. So if they have N indicated in their profile, which means no, when they try to log in using a online session and specifically a remote test session, this is the error message that will appear for them because they don't have the Y indicated as yes. And again, that Y can be indicated through a file upload for the student or manually in the student's profile. So you can update that at any point. We typically like to allow at least 24 hours before trying to test a session again, when updating that to Y. And this is typically an error message that appears with the hybrid session. So if a student doesn't have that Y indicated again, if a student isn't permitted for remote sessions, typically this is the error message that will appear. Say some of the tests in your session do not permit remote administration. So two of the things you can do is you can update the students and allow for 24 hours to elapse so that they can be updated to remote video permissions for yes, or you can remove those students that do not have that enabled for the remote administration and just test the students in person. These are two of the last resources. So everything, all the information I've presented today here can be found in either one of these documents, both for online test or remote testing, and then for in-person as well. So for both CASP and LPAC, everything can be found directly in those, and those links, which I will send to Evan and the team as well. They can go ahead and give those to you as well. And those are the exact chapters as well, but I've highlighted for all the information presented today. So I'm gonna check the chat real quick. Any questions from anybody? Oh, I see one from Sean here. Students have accents. Great, yeah, Sarah, that's actually great. I use that, the Groovy Post one as well. Perfect. It's funny that you that's the exact one I use as well. Yeah, Marissa, yeah, I can definitely reply to that one. So basically, yes, so a TA can open a test session that includes the different schools. Just make sure that those students, or excuse me, the TA is assigned to both of those schools if they plan on opening a session for students for more than one site. Just make sure that they're assigned to that first. Yeah, I know, Chris. I did bring that up to the team about completion reports having to be run by individual LEAs as opposed, because each individual LEA has its own specific code. I have mentioned that to them as well. It might be a possible update, but I can definitely bring that up and stress that point to them for you as far as being able to access all districts and LEA coordinators overseas at once. I completely understand. You got it, Chris. Yeah, definitely. Any other questions?
I'm scrolling through this. It's great that the chat can now, you can respond, but it makes the questions jump out. I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, I just see them. I just see them as they're coming in, and if everybody's still here answering them, I'll just address them live, no problem.
It includes pre-enrolled students on the TOMS landing page. What's considered pre-enrolled? How does TOMS get that information?
Pre-enrolled. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
you've got a ready response, go ahead, and otherwise I think it's might be answerable via CalPads.
Yeah, as far as that's a great question. As far as pre-enrolled students, I think I've come across this maybe once or twice with an LAA. If it's a pre-enrolled date in which the student's information is going to be released to TOMS, it's typically that date. So say, for example, and unfortunately, I don't have a real intimate working knowledge of CalPads, since that's not a system we interface too directly with. But if they've pre-enrolled the students in CalPads, whatever that release date for the information, it should go into TOMS. So if they pre-enroll them for a date and then that pre-enrollment then becomes active, whatever the CalPads administrator is actually sending to TOMS and sending to be updated, that's the date it should be updated in TOMS.
I'll add on to that. For the initial LPAC, a lot of districts will test during the summer prior to the first day of enrollment. And so the earliest that you can test with the initial LPAC is in the first week of July. However, most districts do not have any students enrolled in July, and that doesn't come until maybe mid-August. So they'll input an enrollment starting on the first day of school, and then test anticipated students with the initial LPAC who have filled out a home language survey and completed that paperwork, and have a language other than English interpreted on that home language survey, and that's set up to CalPads in an ELAS file and with a TBD. So students who are generally kinder or new to the district or new to California public schools would be in that category of students that might be pre-enrolled and tested with the initial LPAC prior to the beginning of school year. They do that so that that 30-day deadline can be made, especially when there's lots of students to test.
Yeah, that kind of becomes a little bit of a tricky question. I'm not sure I'll be able to answer that directly. I do know that if they're testing, because I had a situation like this past summer. I know they had pre-enrolled students, but what was happening is they were trying to administer the initial assessment even before the window was open, if I recall correctly, but not on the online part of it. But I believe because it was a lot of kindergarten through second grade students, it was more for the speaking. So they were trying to do that even prior to the new rollover. And that obviously caused a lot of headaches there, because they were trying to get ahead of the administration when the administration wasn't even open yet. But as far as that specific question, that's a good, whoever posed that, that's a great question, because I am stumped.
We'll drop that into the Q&A section for the follow-up.
Yeah, definitely. Any other questions? The power's holding out here so far, so I'm still available.
I think there's just been some follow-up from Maurice's original question. A number of CAS coordinators have actually added some additional insights, including the signing in using incognito windows to launch multiple test sessions.
I do know, I believe, because we did address this in the prior administration year, I don't think they have to open multiple windows if they're assigned to multiple sites. Because technically when they open, as long as they're assigned to that school site for their user role, they should be able to open, like for example, if they're A, B, and C, and they open a session for site A, they should be able to add students from even site B and C to A's, because they have already access to B and C, and they're assigned with a site role. But I can definitely double check with my team to get more specific on that.
This is Carla from West Covina. I can verify that it works. We've been doing it all year long with our independent studies students who are from multiple schools. And so one teacher has students from multiple schools, and they've been doing it with the interim assessments, and they're starting to do it with the summative assessment. So yes, they only need to, the TA only needs to sign into one school, and all the kids, even though they're from different schools, can use the same session ID.
Perfect. Yeah, I thought, yeah, we had, that was a feature that we added last administration year. That was somewhat new, but I'm glad that's working in that fashion, because that's was my understanding about it. As long as they have access to those other school sites, they can launch under site A for any of the students for any of the sites. So thank you for confirming that. I appreciate that. It's nice to hear that feedback directly from the field. So I do want to address Livia's question regarding the newcomer student. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me scroll down. I see Stephen already addressed that. Never mind. Sorry. Yeah. So that's correct. And if any LEA coordinators have any further questions post presentation, I'm available. The quickest method usually through email, which will be region11@ets.org. Or if you call the 800 number directly and select Region 11, if I'm not working with another LEA at the time, I'd be more than happy to assist you directly through call, and I'm also available through chat.
Thank you, Marcus. I think we're at 10:36, so 6 minutes over. So I'm gonna
All right.
call it at that, although we'll stay on for a few more minutes. I'm just gonna quit recording so we can call it a meeting. But thank you everyone for joining us. We'll send out our follow-up Q&A. Any questions that were asked, even if we answer them in the chat, we'll revise them to be as clear as possible, and other direct messages we will also update. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you in person in May, on May 30th. Take care.